The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as Marcus Thompson adjusted his crisp red uniform for the third time. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cool London air but from the overwhelming pride that coursed through his veins. After 18 months of rigorous training, countless hours of drill practice, and more inspections than he could count, he was finally here. Standing guard at Buckingham Palace as a member of the Queen's Guard was the culmination of everything he had worked toward since leaving the army 3 years ago. Marcus had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the parachute regiment before a roadside bomb changed everything. The explosion had taken his left leg below the knee and ended his military career, but it hadn't broken his spirit. The prosthetic he now wore was hidden beneath his perfectly pressed trousers, and only the slightest adjustment in his stance betrayed its presence. His fellow guardsmen knew about his injury, but to the thousands of tourists who would pass by today, he was simply another stoic sentinel protecting the crown. The weight of his bearskin hat felt familiar now, though it had taken months to build up the neck strength required to wear it for hours without strain. His rifle, an SA-80, was positioned precisely as regulation demanded. Every button on his tunic gleamed, every crease was razor-sharp, and his boots reflected the morning light like black mirrors. This wasn't just a job for Marcus. It was a sacred duty that connected him to centuries of British military tradition. As the changing of the guard ceremony concluded, and tourists began to gather along the palace railings, Marcus took his position at the main gate. The routine was familiar now. Maintain perfect posture, keep eyes fixed straight ahead, ignore all attempts at interaction from the public, and remain alert for any genuine security concerns. It was a delicate balance between being a living statue and a highly trained soldier ready to respond to threats. The first few hours passed peacefully. Tourists snapped photos, children waved enthusiastically, and the occasional visitor tried to make him smile or flinch. Marcus had mastered the art of selective attention, hearing everything while appearing to notice nothing. He could identify potential security risks while simultaneously ignoring the harmless antics of sightseers trying to get a reaction. Around midday, the crowd began to thicken as tour groups arrived for the lunch hour rush. Marcus noticed a particular group that seemed different from the usual mix of families and camera-wielding visitors. 3 young men in their early 20s were approaching with an aggressive swagger that immediately put him on alert. Their leader, a heavy-set man with multiple tattoos covering his arms and neck, was speaking loudly and gesturing toward the guards with obvious disdain. "Look at these toy soldiers," the man announced to his companions, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "Standing there like mannequins pretending to be tough. I bet they've never seen real action in their lives." His friends laughed encouragingly, emboldening him to continue his performance for the growing crowd of onlookers. Marcus maintained his composure, but his trained eye assessed the situation quickly. The man was clearly intoxicated, his movements slightly unsteady and his voice too loud for the time of day. His companions seemed more interested in recording the confrontation on their phones than actually participating, which suggested this was planned as some sort of social media stunt. The antagonist moved closer to Marcus's position, his voice growing more aggressive with each step. "What's the matter, toy soldier? Can't even look at me?" Too scared to face a real man, he was now standing directly in front of Marcus, close enough that his breath was visible in the cool air. Other tourists began to step back, sensing the tension building in the situation. Marcus's military training kicked in automatically. He cataloged every detail: the man's approximate weight and height, the position of his hands, the location of potential weapons, and the nearest escape routes for civilians. His breathing remained steady and controlled, his expression unchanged, but every muscle in his body was coiled and ready to respond if the situation escalated beyond verbal harassment. "I'm talking to you, soldier boy," the man continued, now waving his hand directly in front of Marcus's face. "What are you going to do about it? March in place? Play with your little toy gun?" His friends were recording everything, clearly expecting their leader to provoke some sort of reaction that would make for entertaining content online. The crowd of tourists had grown larger, with many people now actively recording the confrontation on their phones. Some looked uncomfortable with the situation, while others seemed entertained by the spectacle. A few whispered among themselves, debating whether they should intervene or call for help. Marcus could feel the weight of his responsibility settling even more heavily on his shoulders. He represented not just himself but the entire institution of the Royal Guard, the British Army, and the monarchy itself. Every tourist watching would form their impression of these institutions based on how he handled this moment. The pressure was immense, but his training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation. The antagonist was becoming more animated, his gestures more erratic, and his voice more aggressive. It was clear that Marcus's lack of response was frustrating him, making him push harder for the reaction he craved. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge, with the potential to explode into violence at any moment. What the aggressive young man didn't know, what none of the watching tourists could see beneath the ceremonial uniform and stoic exterior, was that he was confronting someone who had faced Taliban fighters in the mountains of Afghanistan, who had survived explosions that killed his friends, and who had rebuilt his life from the ground up after losing his leg in service to his country. The stillness that the bully mistook for weakness was actually the calm of a warrior who had been tested in ways this civilian could never imagine. The confrontation was about to reach a tipping point, and Marcus knew that whatever happened next would be captured on dozens of cameras and shared across the internet within minutes. The tension in the courtyard had reached a breaking point when the aggressive young man made his fatal mistake. Emboldened by what he perceived as Marcus's weakness and fueled by the attention from his phone-wielding friends, he decided to cross the line from verbal harassment to physical confrontation. With a sneer that revealed his complete ignorance of whom he was dealing with, he reached out and shoved Marcus hard in the chest. The moment his hands made contact with the red tunic, several things happened simultaneously. Marcus's body, trained through years of military discipline and combat experience, responded with lightning-fast reflexes that betrayed none of the ceremony and tradition of his current role. In one fluid motion that seemed to defy the formal constraints of his uniform, he shifted his weight, absorbed the impact, and prepared for what would inevitably come next. The crowd gasped collectively as they witnessed the sacred boundary between tourist and guard being crossed. Camera phones lifted higher, fingers jabbed at record buttons, and whispered conversations ceased entirely. The atmosphere transformed from casual sightseeing to something far more serious and potentially dangerous. The bully, interpreting Marcus's controlled response as submission, became even more aggressive. "That's what I thought," he shouted, his voice echoing off the palace walls. "Just another pretty boy in a fancy costume. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real fight." His confidence was now at its peak, fed by what he mistook for fear in his opponent. What the young man failed to recognize were the subtle signs that would have been obvious to anyone with military experience. Marcus's breathing hadn't changed despite the physical contact. His stance had shifted almost imperceptibly into something more tactical, while still maintaining the appearance of ceremonial positioning. Most telling of all, his eyes, while still fixed straight ahead as regulation demanded, had taken on a different quality altogether. Marcus was no longer just a guard performing ceremonial duties. The combat veteran inside him had awakened, and he was now assessing threats and calculating responses with the cold precision that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. The prosthetic leg that might have been considered a disadvantage by some was actually perfectly calibrated to his fighting style, having been specifically designed to accommodate his military training. The bully's friends continued filming, completely unaware that they were about to capture something far different from the humiliation of a guard that they had planned. Their leader was seconds away from learning a lesson that would be shared across social media platforms for entirely different reasons than he intended. "Come on then," the antagonist taunted, now standing so close that his breath fogged on Marcus's polished buttons. "Do something about it. Show me what you're made of, toy soldier." He was practically vibrating with false confidence, his entire identity wrapped up in this moment of perceived dominance over someone he saw as powerless to respond. The other tourists in the area had begun to back away more noticeably now, their survival instincts telling them that something significant was about to happen. Parents pulled their children closer, elderly visitors sought the safety of the tour groups, and even the most enthusiastic photographers took a step back while keeping their cameras trained on the unfolding drama. Marcus could feel the weight of protocol pressing down on him. Royal Guards were expected to maintain their composure under all circumstances, to endure harassment without breaking character, and to rely on other security personnel for situations that went beyond mere verbal provocation. But this had now crossed into physical assault, and his training as a soldier superseded his ceremonial duties. The moment stretched out like an eternity as Marcus made his decision. He would not break protocol unnecessarily, but he would also not allow himself to be physically attacked without response. His years of military service had taught him that there were times when action was not just justified, but necessary, and those instincts were now fully engaged. The bully raised his hand again, this time aiming for Marcus's face, completely confident that the guard would simply stand there and take whatever abuse he chose to dish out. His friends cheered him on, their cameras capturing every moment of what they believed would be their leader's triumph over authority. In that instant, as the hand moved toward his face, Marcus's military identity fully merged with his role as a royal guard. He was no longer bound by the limitations of ceremony, because he was now operating under the imperative to protect himself and, by extension, the institution he represented. The transformation was invisible to most observers, but would soon become impossible to ignore. The crowd held its collective breath as they witnessed the final moment before impact. The bully's hand was inches from Marcus's face, his expression twisted with malicious satisfaction. His friends were positioned perfectly to capture what they thought would be the humiliation of a helpless guard. The tourists around them waited in horrified fascination for whatever would happen next. What none of them realized was that they were about to witness the precise moment when civilian harassment met military precision, when ceremony collided with combat experience, and when a bully's confidence encountered the unshakable resolve of someone who had faced real danger and emerged stronger. The courtyard of Buckingham Palace was about to become the setting for a masterclass in the difference between genuine strength and mere aggression. The hand continued its arc toward Marcus's face, carrying with it all of the bully's arrogance and misconceptions about who he was dealing with. In the next few seconds, those misconceptions would be shattered completely, and the power dynamic would shift so dramatically that everyone present would remember this moment for years to come. The transformation happened so quickly that most observers would later struggle to describe exactly what they had witnessed. One moment, the bully's hand was arcing toward Marcus's face with aggressive intent, and the next, he found himself on the ground, his arm twisted behind his back in a position that made any movement extremely painful. Marcus had moved with such fluid precision that his ceremonial uniform barely appeared disturbed, yet the threat had been neutralized completely. The technique Marcus employed was a perfect example of military close-quarters combat training, adapted to the constraints of his ceremonial role. Without releasing his grip on his rifle or significantly altering his formal stance, he had intercepted the incoming hand, redirected its momentum, and used the attacker's own force against him. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds and demonstrated the vast difference between trained military response and civilian aggression. The courtyard fell into stunned silence as tourists processed what had just occurred. The bully, who moments before had been full of swagger and confidence, now lay face down on the cobblestones with his arms secured in a joint lock that prevented any escape. His phone-wielding friends stood frozen, their cameras still recording but their expressions showing complete shock at the reversal of fortune. Marcus maintained his position over the subdued aggressor while simultaneously resuming his ceremonial posture as much as possible. His breathing remained controlled, his expression unchanged, and his eyes returned to their forward gaze as if nothing extraordinary had happened. To the casual observer, it might have appeared that the incident was simply a tourist who had tripped and fallen, were it not for the precise positioning that kept the man immobilized. "Sir," Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command situations. "You are currently interfering with a member of Her Majesty's Guard in the performance of his duties. I recommend you remain still while we wait for security personnel to address this situation." His tone was professional and calm, betraying none of the adrenaline that would have been coursing through a civilian system. The bully attempted to struggle against the hold, but quickly discovered that any movement only increased his discomfort. Marcus's positioning was perfect, applying just enough pressure to maintain control without causing actual injury. This was precision born of extensive training in non-lethal restraint techniques, designed to subdue without escalating to unnecessary violence. The man's friends finally snapped out of their shocked stupor. though their response revealed their complete ignorance of the situation they had created. "Hey, you can't do that," one of them shouted, apparently believing that the guard had somehow acted inappropriately by defending himself. "We're going to sue you, this is assault." Their threats only served to demonstrate how little they understood about military authority, legal self-defense, or the serious nature of assaulting a member of the Royal Guard. Marcus ignored their protests entirely, his focus remaining on maintaining control of the primary threat while monitoring the crowd for any additional security concerns. Within minutes, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed across the courtyard as additional guards and palace security personnel responded to the situation. The Royal Guard's communication system had ensured that backup was already en route before the physical confrontation had even begun, a testament to the professionalism and preparedness of the entire security apparatus. The lead security officer, a veteran sergeant with 20 years of experience, took in the scene with a practiced eye. The positioning of the subdued individual, the calm demeanor of Marcus, and the obvious shock on the faces of the tourists told him everything he needed to know about what had transpired. "Well done, Thompson," he said quietly as additional personnel moved to take control of the situation. As the bully was lifted to his feet and properly restrained by security officers, the full extent of his humiliation became apparent to everyone present. His face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. His clothes were disheveled, and his earlier confidence had evaporated completely. The man who had approached with such arrogance now looked like exactly what he was, someone who had grossly overestimated his own capabilities while severely underestimating his opponent. The crowd of tourists began to murmur among themselves, their conversations a mixture of amazement, approval, and relief that the situation had been resolved so efficiently. Many had witnessed the entire confrontation from the beginning and were clearly impressed by the guard's professionalism and skill. The incident had transformed from an uncomfortable harassment situation into a demonstration of military precision that many would remember as a highlight of their visit to London. The bully's friends found themselves in an increasingly uncomfortable position as security personnel requested their identification and began asking questions about their involvement in the incident. Their earlier bravado had disappeared entirely, replaced by nervous explanations that they had just been filming and hadn't actually participated in the assault. The reality of potential legal consequences was beginning to dawn on them. Marcus, meanwhile, had already returned to his full ceremonial position, his rifle properly positioned, his posture perfect, and his gaze fixed straight ahead as regulation demanded. To someone arriving at the scene now, there would be no indication that anything unusual had occurred. His ability to transition seamlessly between combat response and ceremonial duty was a testament to his professionalism and training. The incident was being recorded not just by tourists, but by the palace's extensive security camera system, ensuring that there would be a complete record of events for any subsequent legal proceedings. The footage would clearly show the progression from verbal harassment to physical assault to measured defensive response, providing unambiguous evidence of who was responsible for escalating the situation. As security personnel escorted the bully and his friends away from the palace grounds, the man continued to protest his treatment, apparently still unable to comprehend that his actions had been inappropriate and illegal. His voice carried across the courtyard as he was led away, making threats about lawyers and lawsuits that only served to further demonstrate his disconnect from reality. The aftermath of the confrontation revealed layers of complexity that went far beyond the simple narrative of bully versus guard. As news of the incident spread through social media channels, powered by the numerous videos captured by tourists, the story began to take on a life of its own. The footage showed clearly what had transpired, but the context behind Marcus's measured response remained largely unknown to the viral audience consuming the content. Within hours of the incident, the video clips had been shared thousands of times across various platforms, the comment sections filled with reactions ranging from admiration for Marcus's professionalism to criticism of what some viewed as excessive force. However, those who understood military protocol recognized the restraint and precision he had demonstrated in handling a volatile situation without escalating it beyond what was necessary for neutralization. The palace's official response came through carefully worded statements that emphasized the guard's duty to protect both the royal premises and the safety of visitors. The incident was characterized as a successful example of professional security protocols being followed correctly when faced with aggressive behavior that crossed the line into physical assault. The statement notably avoided any detailed discussion of Marcus's military background or the specific techniques he had employed. Meanwhile, the legal ramifications for the bully were becoming increasingly serious as the full scope of his actions became clear to authorities. Assaulting a member of the Royal Guard was not simply a matter of disturbing the peace or tourist misconduct. It fell under several serious criminal categories, including assault on a crown servant and interference with royal security operations. The man's earlier confidence about pursuing legal action against Marcus evaporated as he consulted with attorneys who explained the reality of his situation. Marcus himself remained largely insulated from the media attention surrounding the incident. Royal Guards were trained to maintain their privacy and avoid public commentary on their duties, particularly when incidents became subjects of public interest. His focus remained on his responsibilities, though he was quietly satisfied that his response had protected both himself and the integrity of his position, without causing unnecessary harm to his attacker. The investigation that followed revealed additional context that painted the bully's behavior in an even worse light. Security footage from earlier in the day showed him and his friends attempting similar provocations with other guards at different locations around the palace grounds. Their behavior appeared to be part of a planned campaign to create viral content by harassing the guards until they got a reaction they could exploit online. This pattern of behavior demonstrated that the incident with Marcus was not an isolated moment of poor judgment, but rather the culmination of a deliberate strategy to provoke authority figures for entertainment purposes. The premeditated nature of their actions significantly strengthened the legal case against them and undermined any claims that the confrontation had been accidental or misunderstood. The tourist community's reaction to the incident was overwhelmingly positive toward Marcus and critical of the bully's behavior. Many visitors who had witnessed the events firsthand spoke to news outlets about feeling unsafe during the harassment and expressing relief at how professionally the situation had been handled. Their testimonies painted a clear picture of escalating aggression that had made legitimate tourists uncomfortable long before physical contact occurred. International media attention began to focus on the broader issue of tourist behavior at royal sites and the challenges faced by ceremonial guards, who were also trained soldiers. Marcus's story became a symbol of the professionalism expected from military personnel, even when faced with deliberate provocation designed to make them break protocol. The bully's social media accounts, which had been intended to showcase his harassment of the guards, instead became evidence of his pattern of disrespectful behavior toward authority figures and public institutions. His friends, who had eagerly participated in filming what they thought would be humorous content, now found themselves facing potential charges as accessories to the assault and public disorder. As the legal process moved forward, character witnesses began to emerge who painted very different pictures of the two main participants in the incident. Marcus's military record, including his service in Afghanistan and his recovery from combat injuries, began to surface through unofficial channels. His colleagues spoke of his dedication, professionalism, and the respect he had earned from fellow soldiers and superiors alike. In contrast, the bully's background revealed a pattern of antisocial behavior and previous run-ins with law enforcement. His employment history showed difficulty maintaining jobs, and his social media presence was filled with content that celebrated confrontation and disrespect toward various authority figures. The incident at the palace appeared to be part of a larger pattern rather than an isolated mistake. The prosthetic leg that Marcus wore, unknown to most observers during the incident, became a particularly powerful symbol when the full story emerged. Here was someone who had sacrificed his physical wholeness in service to his country, continuing to serve with distinction despite his injuries, being attacked by someone whose greatest hardship appeared to be maintaining employment and respecting social norms. Military veterans organizations rallied around Marcus's story, using it to highlight both the continued service of wounded warriors and the disrespect often shown to those in uniform by civilians who had never faced the challenges of military service. The incident became a teaching moment about the difference between genuine strength and mere aggression, between earned authority and bullying behavior. The palace administration quietly commended Marcus for his handling of the situation, noting that his response had perfectly balanced the need for self-defense with the requirements of his ceremonial position. His ability to neutralize a threat while maintaining the dignity of his role was cited as an example of the high standards expected from the royal guard. The courtroom where the bully's case was heard 3 months later presented a stark contrast to the ornate grandeur of Buckingham Palace where the incident had occurred. The sterile environment of modern justice seemed almost mundane compared to the historic setting where centuries of tradition had been violated by a moment of foolish aggression. Marcus sat in the witness section, his civilian clothes unable to hide the military bearing that had become second nature after years of service. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating in its thoroughness. Video evidence from multiple angles showed clearly how the situation had escalated from verbal harassment to physical assault, with Marcus responding only after being struck first. The prosecutor emphasized the premeditated nature of the harassment campaign, presenting evidence from social media, posts and witness testimony that painted a picture of deliberate provocation designed to create viral content at the expense of serving soldiers. When Marcus took the stand to give his testimony, his calm professionalism impressed everyone present. He described the events in precise factual terms without emotion or embellishment, letting the actions speak for themselves. His military training and situation reporting was evident as he provided clear timelines and accurate descriptions of each phase of the confrontation, from initial verbal harassment through the physical assault and his necessary response. Defense attorneys' attempts to portray Marcus as having used excessive force fell flat when confronted with expert testimony about military restraint techniques. A former Special Forces instructor explained to the jury how Marcus's response had actually demonstrated remarkable restraint, using the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat while avoiding any techniques that could have caused serious injury to his attacker. The contrast between the two main participants became even more stark during the proceedings. While Marcus answered questions with quiet dignity and factual precision, the bully's testimony was filled with attempts to blame others for his actions and minimize his responsibility for what had occurred. His claims that he had been just joking and hadn't meant any harm rang hollow when confronted with the video evidence of his aggressive behavior. The judge, a veteran jurist with decades of experience in criminal cases, seemed particularly unimpressed with the defendant's attempts to portray himself as a victim. During sentencing remarks, she noted that the assault on a member of the Royal Guard represented not just an attack on an individual, but an assault on the institutions and traditions that the Guard represented. The symbolic nature of the crime elevated its seriousness beyond a simple altercation between civilians. The sentence reflected the gravity of the offense and the defendant's lack of genuine remorse. 6 months in prison, followed by 2 years of probation and a substantial fine, sent a clear message about the consequences of such behavior. Additionally, the judge imposed a lifetime ban from all royal properties and tourist sites, ensuring that the defendant would never again have the opportunity to repeat his offensive conduct. Marcus felt no satisfaction in seeing his attacker sentenced, but he recognized the importance of the precedent being set. The message was clear. Those who chose to harass or assault members of the military, whether in combat zones or ceremonial duties, would face serious consequences. The protection of service members from civilian aggression was a principle worth defending through the legal system. The civil lawsuit that the bully had threatened to file never materialized once his attorneys explained the futility of such action. Not only was Marcus's response legally justified as self-defense, but the defendant's own criminal conviction for assault made any civil claim virtually impossible to pursue successfully. The legal fees alone would have bankrupted him even if he had somehow prevailed, which his lawyers assured him was impossible. The broader impact of the case extended far beyond the individuals involved. Tourism authorities used the incident as an opportunity to educate visitors about appropriate behavior around ceremonial guards and other security personnel. New signage and briefings emphasized that while guards might appear ceremonial, they were fully trained soldiers with the authority and responsibility to respond to threats appropriately. Marcus returned to his duties with renewed appreciation for the support he had received from his fellow guards, the palace administration, and the broader military community. The incident had tested not just his physical abilities, but his judgment under pressure, and he had passed both tests admirably. His colleagues treated him no differently than before, which was exactly the acknowledgement he had hoped for. The social media attention gradually faded as new viral incidents captured public interest, but the lessons from the confrontation continued to resonate within military and security communities. Training programs began incorporating the incident as a case study in appropriate response to civilian aggression while maintaining professional standards and legal compliance. Marcus's story also became an inspiration within veteran support networks, demonstrating how military skills and discipline could be successfully adapted to civilian roles. His transition from combat soldier to ceremonial guard, despite his physical injuries, showed other wounded veterans that meaningful service could continue in different forms after military careers ended due to injury. The tourists who had witnessed the original incident often returned to the palace, hoping to see Marcus again, and expressed their appreciation for how he had handled such a difficult situation. While protocol prevented him from acknowledging such recognition directly, their continued respect for the guards and the institution they represented was the best possible outcome from what could have been a much more damaging incident. The palace grounds returned to their normal rhythm of ceremonial duties and tourist visits, but the memory of that confrontation served as a quiet reminder to both guards and visitors about the serious responsibilities and real authority that lay beneath the pageantry of royal tradition. Marcus continued his duties with the same dedication and professionalism that had characterized his entire military career, knowing that he had upheld the highest standards of both institutions he had served. 2 years after the incident that had briefly made him internet famous, Marcus Thompson found himself reflecting on how dramatically that single moment had changed, not just his own life, but the lives of everyone involved. The bully who had attacked him had served his prison sentence and was now working in a warehouse job. His social media aspirations permanently derailed by his criminal record and the lasting humiliation of his public defeat. The former aggressor's friends, who had been so eager to film what they thought would be entertaining content, had faced their own consequences. While they avoided criminal charges, their association with the incident had cost them jobs and social relationships. The video they had hoped would make them minor celebrities instead became a permanent reminder of their poor judgment, following them in background checks and online searches for years to come. Marcus, meanwhile, had found that his measured response to an impossible situation had opened doors he never expected. Military training academies began inviting him to speak about crisis management and appropriate use of force. His story became a case study in how proper training and disciplined thinking could prevent a bad situation from becoming a catastrophic one. The prosthetic leg that had once seemed like a limitation had become a source of inspiration for other wounded veterans transitioning to civilian careers. Marcus received dozens of letters from former soldiers struggling with their own physical challenges, many crediting his example with giving them hope that meaningful service could continue even after combat injuries ended military careers. His role within the Royal Guard had evolved as well. Senior officers recognized his natural leadership abilities and his gift for remaining calm under pressure. He was promoted to training instructor, responsible for preparing new guards for the unique challenges of ceremonial duty, while maintaining readiness for real security threats. His experience with civilian harassment became part of the standard curriculum. The incident had also sparked broader changes in how tourist sites managed interactions between visitors and security personnel. The palace implemented new crowd control measures and educational programs designed to prevent similar confrontations before they could escalate. Other historic sites across Britain adopted similar protocols, using Marcus's experience as a model for protecting both their staff and their visitors. The legal precedent set by the bully's conviction had far-reaching effects throughout the justice system. Prosecutors began taking assaults on ceremonial guards more seriously, recognizing them as attacks on both individuals and institutions. Defense attorneys found it much harder to argue that such incidents were harmless pranks or misunderstandings when confronted. With the clear legal standards established by this case, Marcus's personal life had stabilized in ways he hadn't expected when he first took the guard position. The confidence he had gained from successfully handling the crisis had carried over into other areas of his life. He had met Sarah, a physical therapist who worked with wounded veterans, and their relationship had grown into something he was considering making permanent. Sarah understood the unique challenges faced by former combat soldiers better than most civilians could. She had helped Marcus work through some of the psychological adjustments required by his transition from active combat roles to ceremonial duties, and her professional expertise had helped him optimize his physical conditioning around his prosthetic leg. The media attention that had initially made Marcus uncomfortable had eventually died down, but it had served an important purpose in educating the public about the reality of military service and the challenges faced by wounded veterans. Interview requests still came occasionally, particularly around veterans' holidays, but Marcus had learned to be selective about which opportunities would genuinely help other veterans rather than simply generating headlines. His relationship with his fellow guards had deepened through the shared experience of dealing with the aftermath of the incident. They had all learned valuable lessons about crowd psychology, threat assessment, and the importance of maintaining professional standards even when provoked. The unit's cohesion and mutual trust had been strengthened by seeing how one of their own had handled an impossible situation with grace and skill. The tourists who continued to visit Buckingham Palace were generally more respectful than they had been before the incident became widely known. While most visitors had always been appropriate in their behavior, the highly publicized consequences faced by the bully had served as an effective deterrent to those who might have been tempted to test the guards' patience. Marcus often thought about the chain of events that had led to that confrontation. If he had chosen a different career path after his military service, if the bully had decided to spend that day differently, if any number of small decisions had been made differently, none of the subsequent changes would have occurred. The randomness of how life-altering moments could emerge from ordinary circumstances never ceased to amaze him. The support he had received from the veteran community had been overwhelming and sustained. Organizations that helped wounded warriors transition to civilian careers had used his story to demonstrate that physical limitations didn't have to define someone's future contributions. His success in adapting his military skills to a very different kind of service had become a model for others facing similar transitions. The palace administration had quietly recognized his contributions with commendations and increased responsibilities, though they maintained their traditional discretion about individual guards. His superiors understood that Marcus had not only protected himself and maintained the dignity of his position, but had also handled the subsequent media attention in a way that reflected well on the entire institution. 5 years had passed since that transformative moment in the palace courtyard, and Marcus Thompson stood once again in his red tunic and bearskin hat, but this time as the senior training sergeant responsible for preparing the next generation of Royal Guards. The responsibilities he now carried extended far beyond his own ceremonial duties to encompass the development of young soldiers who would carry on the traditions he had learned to embody. The training program he had developed incorporated lessons learned not just from his own experience, but from careful study of similar incidents around the world. His curriculum balanced the ceremonial aspects of guard duty with practical security concerns, ensuring that new guards understood both their symbolic importance and their real-world responsibilities as armed soldiers protecting critical national sites. Marcus's approach to training emphasized psychological preparation as much as physical conditioning. He had learned that the greatest challenge facing ceremonial guards was not the physical demands of standing at attention for hours, but the mental discipline required to maintain professionalism while being subjected to constant attempts at provocation by tourists seeking reactions. The story of his confrontation with the bully had become a cornerstone of his teaching methodology, though he was careful to present it as a cautionary tale about the importance of restraint rather than a heroic narrative. His students learned that the measure of a good guard was not their ability to physically dominate aggressors, but their capacity to defuse situations while maintaining both personal safety and institutional dignity. The bully himself had undergone his own transformation during the intervening years, though it had taken much longer and involved considerably more struggle. After serving his prison sentence and losing multiple jobs due to his criminal record, he had eventually found steady employment and began the difficult process of rebuilding his reputation. He had never contacted Marcus directly, but through mutual acquaintances, word had reached Marcus that the man had expressed genuine remorse for his actions. This news had actually brought Marcus some satisfaction, not because he took pleasure in his former attacker's difficulties, but because it suggested that the consequences of that day had ultimately served their intended purpose. Justice systems worked best when they not only punished wrongdoing, but also encouraged genuine behavioral change. And it appeared that in this case, the process had succeeded on both levels. The technological landscape that had amplified the original incident continued to evolve, with social media platforms implementing new policies designed to discourage content that involved harassment of public officials or military personnel. The viral nature of the confrontation had contributed to broader conversations about digital responsibility and the real-world consequences of content created for online entertainment. Marcus's personal life had also reached new levels of stability and happiness. He had married Sarah in a ceremony attended by his fellow guards and many of the veterans he had met through his speaking engagements. Their shared understanding of military culture and the challenges faced by wounded warriors had created a foundation for their relationship that went beyond typical civilian partnerships. The couple had recently purchased a home near the base where Marcus worked, and they were expecting their first child. The prospect of fatherhood had given Marcus new perspective on the importance of the values he taught his students: honor, duty, restraint, and service to something greater than oneself. He wanted to be able to explain to his future child why these principles mattered in practical terms, not just as abstract ideals. His role as a trainer had evolved to include consultation work with other military units facing similar challenges in high-visibility assignments. Embassy guards, honor guards at national monuments, and ceremonial units around the world had sought his expertise in developing protocols for dealing with civilian harassment while maintaining their primary missions. The lessons learned from that single incident had rippled outward through multiple institutions and training programs, creating lasting improvements in how military personnel were prepared for roles that combined ceremonial duties with real security responsibilities. Marcus took pride in knowing that his measured response to an aggressive fool had ultimately made many other soldiers better prepared for similar challenges. The tourists who visited Buckingham Palace continued to be generally respectful, though Marcus occasionally noticed visitors pointing him out to their companions. His reputation within the tourist community had become legendary, though he maintained his professional demeanor regardless of whether people recognized him from the viral videos that had made him briefly famous. On quiet days when he stood guard duty himself, Marcus sometimes reflected on the chain of events that had brought him to this point in his life. The roadside bomb that had ended his combat career had seemed like a devastating setback at the time, but it had ultimately led him to a form of service that he found equally meaningful and arguably more influential than anything he had accomplished as a regular soldier. The prosthetic leg that had once seemed like a limitation had become a symbol of resilience that inspired others facing their own physical challenges. His successful adaptation to his injury had demonstrated that military skills and values could be successfully transferred to roles that required different capabilities than those needed in combat operations. As the sun set over the palace grounds on another day of ceremonial duty, Marcus felt a deep satisfaction with the path his life had taken. The aggressive young man who had tried to humiliate him had unknowingly provided him with an opportunity to demonstrate principles that mattered: courage, restraint, professionalism, and service. The lasting impact of that demonstration continued to influence lives and institutions years after the cameras had stopped recording, and the viral videos had been replaced by newer content. The lesson that emerged from that confrontation was simple but profound. True strength was not about dominating others or seeking confrontation, but about maintaining one's principles and responsibilities even when faced with deliberate provocation. Marcus had learned that lesson in the mountains of Afghanistan, and he had taught it on the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace, ensuring that it would continue to guide future generations of soldiers who would face their own tests of character and judgment.